If you have a dog that struggles when left alone, as the holidays approach, you might be left wondering, should you continue training? If you haven't started training, is now a good time to start? Should you wait to start fresh in the new year, etc.? And I have been doing this for many, many years now. And at this point, I've started to better understand what works well in some situations and what likely isn't going to be helpful for a lot of clients that are working through this type of behavior modification protocol. So today, I wanted to touch on a couple of very important variables that are likely going to impact whether or not you should continue with training. And then I will dive a little bit deeper into each of them to give you a better understanding of the whys and if you should and if you shouldn't, etc. So one of the first variables to keep in mind is, how does your individual dog respond to transitions? So when I say transitions, that's a semi-loose label. What I'm referring to is, depending on the dog, it might be, changes to routine. So maybe you usually work from home and there's daycare on this days, but that's shifted. How does your dog respond to that? Maybe you usually take a walk first thing in the morning, but because of work, you had to shift it later. How does your dog respond to that shift? Perhaps it's something a little bit bigger, like maybe you are having friends come over and your dog gets very excited when they arrive. Does your dog, or scared, it could be either end of the spectrum, right? How does your dog cope with that type of transition? Or even more prevalent with these cases, I would say, when one parent leaves, like let's say parent number one leaves and then parent number two is home, how long does it take that dog to kind of decompress, get back down to like that neutral zone, we call it? How do they handle that transition? So that's one thing that's going to impact whether or not you should continue with training for over the holidays. The other thing would be, what are your plans? Like, are you going to have the whole family stay at your house? Are you going to go stay at their house? Are you just taking a break from life and you're just going on vacation? What your plan is will definitely play into this. How far into training are you? So for example, are you more seasoned? Have you been working on this 8 months, or is this brand new? Did you just start last week, or are you just thinking about starting? Maybe you haven't officially dove in, right? If you are traveling, things to think about are, is this a familiar environment for your dog? So for example, if you have a vacation home and you're going there, then maybe, yeah, it's totally familiar. Or even if you have, your father-in-law or mother-in-law watches your dog a lot while you're out doing errands, and if that's where you're going, that's a fairly, regular place for your dog. Or is it a brand new Airbnb or hotel with new smells, new noises that's completely unfamiliar to them? That will also come into play with this, and we'll talk about that more in the future. Another thing to think about, if you are going to say, a vacation home or your sister's house, and you will be spending a lot of time kind of back and forth at your sister's house for the foreseeable future, is your dog going to be left there alone in the future? Or is this a single instance trip that your dog will never return? So keep that in mind as we dive deeper. And then another really big one, I would say, if not one of the biggest, is how long are you going to be there? Or how long are the people going to be at your home? How long is this, change to your normal routine going to exist? The reason for that, and we'll dive much deeper, is there's something called acclimation period. And if your dog does struggle with, transitions like we talked about in the very first one, that's probably going to have a big play into whether or not you continue. So now that I've laid, some of the variables, there's many out there, but these are some of the ones that I see clients bring to the table and ask me often. So let's talk about these. So when it comes to individual transitions, I will say, semi-biased because of what I do for a living, but most of the dogs that I work with do have a really hard time with transition. So whether a client is changing their job and their time they leave in the morning is slightly different, or whether they're just moving around their office, their dogs can really struggle with transition. Sometimes even just setting up the laptop for training is enough transition for them to startle with, right? If your dog does struggle with transitions, gonna loop back in that lower kind of final variable that I talked about, how long are you actually going to be in this setup? So if you have family coming over, how long are they going to be there? Are we talking 3 days? Are we talking 3 weeks? Same thing for if you're going somewhere. Keep in mind that we need to provide ample acclimation time for your dog, whether people are coming over and it's exciting, or whether you're going somewhere else and it's exciting. We have to provide ample time for them to transition and kind of, oh, it's exciting or stressful or fearful. And now I'm feeling a little bit more kind of neutral. I'm not jumping up every single time everybody gets up. So how long you're going to be there is going to definitely impact whether or not you have enough time to allow your dog the transition time necessary to give them that acclimation to then dive into training. A lot of these pups might take, and this is just, every dog's an individual, this is just an example, but if your dog takes about 3 to 5 days in a new environment. And again, if you're only going to be there for a week, sure, you might be able to get in 1 or 2 at the end. But ultimately, it's probably not going to be very realistic. Again, what are your plans going to be? So are you going to have people come over? Or are you going to go stay at somebody's house? This is a big one because many of you that are working on alone time, and if you're not, here's a little, glimmer into what this looks like. We're very specific about the variables. So whether it's parent 1 training or parent 2 training or parent 1 and 2 and the kids or whatever the setup is, we have very different thresholds depending on who is going to be doing the training or what time of day, etc. When you have a lot of other people, which tends to be the situation over the holidays, when you have more people than what are the typical, suspects for doing training. Suspects. Why did I call you suspects? The typical people that do the training, the typical people that run through the motions. When you have a different layout, when you have different people, exciting or new, novel, whatever the jazz is, it can be hard to find time to train. Typically, if you are able, let's say your dog does kind of transition well, they acclimate like nice and easy. If you're in a household with 10 people, that's chaotic. That can be a lot of arousal increase, etc. So what I typically recommend is, if you can, if your dog is comfortable enough to train, you need to be doing it with only the people that do the training regularly. It's not fair unless you're very seasoned, you've been doing this for some time, you've played around with adding new people and dog sitters, family, etc. You're in a different kind of spectrum there. For you, yes, you might be able to just dive in. More of us, though, we need to be cautious with the variable setup. We need to make sure we're not just adding new people in. Your dog is not used to person A, B, and C also being added into the game. So you're going to be seeing completely different responses for alone time, if I were to guess. If you can, which it's not usually easy around the holidays because we have kiddos, we have family members, grandparents, etc. If we are able to do it at a time where the rest of the family's out, that might be feasible. I do typically give at least 30-minute window of decompression after somebody leaves or people leave to kind of make it less exciting. I don't want the whole family to leave. They leave, close the door, and then you 5 minutes later are like, okay, let's do this thing. You're going to get a different response. Hiccups. Typically, I recommend waiting at least 15 to 30 minutes after an exciting event. I would classify family coming and going as potentially an exciting event. How far into training? This is going to be a big one. So again, if you are seasoned, you have been doing this for 6 months, a year, whatever that looks like for you. Every dog is very different with how long they need to do a protocol. Sometimes it's not that long, sometimes it's longer. Depending on where you're at with training might impact whether or not you should continue. So again, if you have traveled before, if it's not stressful for you, that's a big thing, feel free to continue. If you're newer though, be understanding that dogs don't generalize well. So if your dog is used to doing training at your home at this time with these people and you're changing the environment, you are likely going to get a different response, similar to doing different people. So just keeping that in mind and being gentle. If you still want to train, because let's say, and I've had this happen, I have a client that travels for a living. So they're going to be bouncing back and forth and their dog goes with them and they need them to be comfortable. If that's life, if that's normal life for your dog, assuming that they don't have high levels of stress or toxic stress dealing with those transitions, you might want to train in new environments anyways, right? So this is something that is very case specific and it'll be depending on how many pre-departure cues you have, how many steps you have been doing, what your final step durations are. So definitely don't feel scared to reach out. I can definitely kind of pick this apart with you a little bit more. Another thing to keep in mind is the traveling. If you're going to be in a familiar environment, that can be helpful. So if you are going to be, again, always in Airbnbs or always, going to your vacation home or brother-in-law's house, whatever the situation is, it can be helpful to train in those situations if your dog has enough understanding of the training foundation first. If you're new at this and your dog is still, jumping up to follow you to the door every time in your own home, probably not super helpful to practice in a new environment yet. Not saying that following to the door is the end of the world. Every dog's an individual. But for a case where they're still like on that immediate alert, up alert, up alert, probably not going to be the best time to then say, hey, let's do a completely different setup here. So familiar environment can definitely be helpful, especially if that's normal life for you. Otherwise, if you are pretty much, work from home 9 to 5 or go to the office a couple days a week, you don't travel a ton, maybe every once in a while, once or twice a year, you might not need that training in a familiar environment. It might do more stress, like increase more stress for your dog and for you if you're seeing different responses than it does actually provide help with the protocol. So just keep that in mind. And again, that goes into play with what the dog will the dog ever be left again in a similar environment in the future? If the answer is yes, again, go for it. I have clients that travel very regularly and they need to have their dog comfortable. So we practice every new place and that's fine. That's very abnormal though. That's not every client. So look at what your individual dog and what your individual life moving forward might look like with them. And then again, the most important thing, and I touched on this a little bit, how long are you going to be there? If you're only going to be there for a couple of days, don't do the training. Take a break. It's the holiday season. Spend time with your family. My whole goal as a trainer, behavior consultant, is to decrease stress. Take stress off of your plate. If you're trying to enjoy the holidays with family you haven't seen in a while, making sure you get in your sessions and get 5 gold stars, that's the least of my worries. You need a break. Your dog needs a break. Decompression is just as valuable, in my experience, in my personal opinion, it's just as valuable as the training itself. So rather than always thinking we need to go, 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 so we hit our goals as fast as possible, remember that that's not how behavior works. Behavior is not linear. We need to have downtime. So if it's just a longer weekend or even a week, even 2 weeks, you guys, feel free to give yourself a break. We don't do it enough. A lot of people are scared that if they do a break, when they jump back in, they're going to have to start all the way over at step 1. Sometimes yes, but not always. More often than not, to give you a light at the end of the tunnel, I see clients that take a break, and when they come back, we always go easy. We dial down a notch, right? We make it easy on return, to be cautious. But once we get back into the swing of things, not only is their dog jumping back much faster than it took the initial time in my experience, but their levels of comfort are also increased because they had a full just decompressing vacation, as hopefully you did too. The last thing that I want to talk about is after the holidays, to kind of dive back in. I am going to make a vlog specific to this and how to dive back in or start fresh in the new year. So stay tuned for that in a little bit here. But for right now, just remember that as you transition away from a break or the holidays, what we're talking about right now, go easy. Look back at your tracker. If you're not tracking, you should be tracking. Start tracking. But look back at your tracker. Look at what duration or criteria your dog has hit multiple times without any concern, and go back to that level. Even if it means you're, just an example, but even if you're on week 12 and you're going back to week 8, that's fine. This is temporary. We are trying to just kind of open up the can right when we're diving back in, but not fully just like open up the whole thing. We just want to remind them, hey, can you smell that? Like we're getting right back into like what we were doing before. See, still not stressful. And once you start seeing those normal patterns, then you can start increasing the complexity to wherever you were at before. Okay. I will say this is general overview. Every dog is an individual. You will hear me say this time and time again. If you specifically have a situation that I have not discussed, please do not hesitate to reach out directly. You can reply to this email directly, as well as at the bottom of the email. If you listened to the video, hopefully you did this far. At the bottom of the video, there is a link to sign up for my last group coaching call for the year. Typically, this is just for clients that I'm working with, but I'm extending it to everybody right now because I really see that there are so many people that need help around the holidays and first beginning of the new year. So click the group coaching session. It is completely complimentary. It's an hour or however long it needs to be, depending on how many people are there. You can ask me questions. It's right before the holidays, so perfect timing if you have like holiday specifics, or if you just have questions about your case, what to do. Are you at a standstill? Do you want to add something in and you're having a hard time wrapping your mind around it? This is a perfect time to come with all of those questions. There's no judgment. You will be talking to me directly. And depending on how many people are available before the holidays, some of them might send questions in, other people might be there live. You can kind of talk with a community that is also dealing with the same thing that you are struggling with. So it's really nice, and it's a good thing to have, knowing that you have people that are in your corner. So if you can't join us live, no biggie. There will be a recording. Just make sure that I know you want the recording. Reply to this email. Tell me any questions you want me to answer for you. If you're watching this on YouTube or anything of the like, you're not seeing this in the email, just leave me a comment below or send me a message at Allie@trainingwithallie.com, and I will send you personally a link to how to sign up for these things, okay? So yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm super eager to hear how everybody had, successes over the holidays or just took awesome breaks, whatever it ends up being. Regardless, have a great rest of your year, whatever you celebrate, and I will see all of you fresh and new in 2025.